I had just given birth 3 days earlier when my key stopped fitting the front door of my own house. The doctor had warned me not to lift anything heavier than my baby, not to climb stairs too quickly, not to let stress spike my blood pressure while my stitches were still fresh. I was moving slowly, one careful step at a time. The late afternoon sun warming the brick walkway my father had laid himself 20 years ago. My son was asleep in his car seat, his tiny fist curled against a blue hospital blanket. I slid the key into the lock. It would not turn. I frowned and tried again, wincing as a sharp pull ran across my abdomen. The metal felt different beneath my fingers. Brighter. New. The locks had been changed. Before I could process it, I heard heels click against the porch boards, looking for something. I turned. And there was my sister, Lauren Reynolds, standing in the doorway of the house legally titled in my name. She was holding a thick manila folder like it was a prize. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson's curtains shifted. Lauren smiled gently, the way she did in church when she wanted people to think she was compassionate. "You're not stable enough to raise a child or manage property right now," she said softly. "It's mine now." My son stirred in his seat and began to cry. Then she delivered the line that made the air leave my lungs. I already filed for emergency guardianship. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of my baby's cry and the hum of cicadas in the oak trees above us. My body still felt like it belonged in a hospital bed, not on a front porch being locked out of my own life. "Guardianship," I repeated, my voice thin. Lauren stepped aside slightly so I could see inside. My living room looked exactly as I had left it before going into labor. The framed photographs, the antique piano, my father's leather chair by the window. She held up the folder. "You signed a power of attorney before delivery. Remember? This is just an extension. Temporary. For everyone's safety." She said it like she was explaining a recipe. I shifted the baby carrier to my other hand, biting back pain. That document was for paying bills if I was in surgery. "It didn't give you ownership. It gives me authority to act in your best interest," she replied smoothly. "And after speaking with the court, they agree there are concerns." Behind her, my neighbor's front door creaked open a fraction. "Someone was watching." Lauren lowered her voice. "But not enough. You've been emotional for months. Paige. Paranoid about finances. Obsessed with the trust. This is what's best for the baby." There it was. Not just the house. The trust. Our parents' estate. The inheritance I had been appointed trustee over because I was the only one with financial training. "Let me in," I said quietly. She shook her head. "The hearing is in 2 days. You can explain yourself there." 2 days. 48 hours. She stepped back inside and pulled the door closed. The new lock clicked with a finality that felt louder than it should have. I stood there on the porch of the house my father built with his own hands, holding my 3-day-old son, and realized that my sister hadn't acted in panic. She had planned this. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I shifted the baby seat carefully and checked the screen. Unknown number. Voicemail from Charleston County Family Court. My heart began to pound. I pressed play. "This is a courtesy notification regarding the emergency guardianship petition filed under case number..." The clerk's voice was neutral, almost bored. "Hearing scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. Friday. 48 hours. Lauren must have filed before I was even discharged. A cold clarity spread through me, pushing aside the fog of exhaustion. I remembered her insisting, during my 8th month of pregnancy, that I sign temporary paperwork just in case something happened in surgery. I had been swollen, tired, grateful for help. I had trusted her. Now she was using that trust as a weapon. My son's crying softened into small hiccups. I leaned down carefully and kissed his forehead. Across the yard, Mrs. Henderson finally stepped onto her porch. "Oh my," she murmured. "Is everything all right?" Lauren reappeared in the doorway before I could answer. "It's just a family matter," she said brightly. "We're making sure the baby's safe." Safe. As if I were the danger. I straightened, ignoring the pull in my abdomen. The house is in my name, I said, meeting Lauren's eyes. You can't just take it. She tilted her head. Not for long. She closed the door again. I stood there another moment, letting the humiliation settle into something harder. Pain was temporary. Paperwork was not. If she won temporary guardianship, she would gain control over my financial decisions, over the trust, over the estate our parents had built. She could argue I was mentally incompetent. She could freeze assets. She could rewrite the narrative of who I was. And she was counting on me being too weak to fight. I adjusted my grip on the carrier and turned away from the house. The court date was in 48 hours. My stitches might still be fresh, but so was my resolve. And if Lauren thought motherhood had made me fragile, she was about to learn that she had just declared war on the wrong sister. I did not sleep that night. The hotel room smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and new carpet. Nothing like the cedar floors of my house or the familiar creak of the hallway outside my bedroom. My son slept in the portable bassinet beside the bed, his breathing soft and steady, completely unaware that his mother had just been locked out of her own home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lauren standing in the doorway with that folder in her hand. Emergency guardianship. The words replayed like a legal siren. I propped myself up against the pillows, careful of the stitches pulling tight across my abdomen, and opened my laptop. If Lauren wanted to drag this into court, then I would start where she had. Charleston County's online docket system loaded slowly. My hands trembled. Whether from exhaustion or anger, I couldn't tell. I entered the case number from the voicemail. There it was. Petitioner, Lauren Reynolds. Respondent, Paige Reynolds. I clicked on the petition and began reading. She alleged that I had demonstrated erratic financial decision-making during the final months of pregnancy, that I had shown heightened emotional volatility, that I had expressed overwhelming stress inconsistent with safe guardianship of an infant. My throat tightened. She attached partial medical notes, not full records, fragments, a line about fatigue, a line about anxiety over balancing work and motherhood. Words every expectant mother has spoken at some point, rearranged to suggest instability. I scrolled further. She claimed she feared for the long-term preservation of the Reynolds family estate if I continued serving as trustee under compromised mental health conditions. There it was again. The trust. This wasn't about my baby. It was about inheritance. About control. I leaned back and winced as pain shot across my abdomen. My son stirred and let out a small cry. I reached over and placed my hand gently on his chest until he settled. How had she accessed my medical notes? A cold realization slid into place. Lauren volunteered at the clinic's fundraising committee. She knew staff. She knew how to ask the right questions. How to frame concern as charity. I went back to the petition and checked the filing timestamp. 2 days ago. That was the morning of my surgery. She had filed while I was still on an operating table. The room suddenly felt smaller. This had not been a reaction to postpartum stress. It had been scheduled. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Aunt Marjorie. Sweetheart, your sister says you're having a hard time? Maybe it's best to let her help for now. I stared at the message. Another one followed. She's just worried about the baby and the inheritance. You know how complicated estates can be. Inheritance. As if I were some reckless gambler instead of the trustee appointed by our parents. I typed back slowly. Did she tell you she filed before I was discharged? There was no immediate response. I closed my eyes for a moment and let memory surface. 8 months pregnant. Swollen ankles. Papers spread across my dining table. Lauren leaning over me with a pen in hand. This is just temporary power of attorney, she had said lightly. In case you're under anesthesia longer than expected. I'll pay your bills. Handle the mortgage. That's it. I had signed. I trusted her. Now she was waving that document in front of neighbors like it gave her ownership. I opened the scanned copy of the power of attorney from my files. It clearly stated limited authority for financial transactions during medical incapacitation. Nothing about property transfer. Nothing about guardianship. Nothing about trustee removal. But perception mattered in court. And Lauren understood perception. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank that managed our family trust. After several transfers, a compliance officer came on the line. Her tone was professional. Careful. Yes. Ms. Reynolds. We are aware of the pending guardianship petition, she said. My pulse quickened. Aware in what capacity? There has been an internal review flag placed on discretionary trustee actions pending clarification from the court. A flag. What does that mean? I asked. It means that while routine operations continue, certain larger disbursements or structural decisions may require additional verification. The scholarship fund payments due next month flashed through my mind. The maintenance contract on our rental properties. Property tax schedules. Has my authority been suspended? I asked. Not suspended, she replied. Reviewed. The word felt just as dangerous. Did Lauren contact you directly? I asked. There was a brief pause. She provided documentation of the petition. The compliance officer said carefully. We are obligated to evaluate any credible claims of trustee incapacity. Credible claims. Lauren had already planted doubt. I ended the call and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from my editor. Paige. I've received inquiries regarding a family court matter involving you. Is everything okay? The investigative stories I worked on often involved corruption and financial misconduct. My credibility was my currency. If Lauren successfully painted me as unstable, it would ripple beyond family. It would touch my career. I dialed Daniel Harper. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call, he said. I've read the petition, I replied. She filed before I was discharged. There was silence on the other end. Before? He asked. Yes. Another pause. That changes things, he said quietly. How? I asked. Timing matters in probate and trust law, he replied. If she initiated hostile legal action while you were still medically incapacitated, we may have leverage. Leverage. The word steadied me. I reviewed your father's original trust file tonight, he continued. Not the summary copy. My heart skipped. And I asked. There's something your sister never read, he said. Outside the hotel window, the city lights reflected against the dark water of the harbor. For the first time since standing on my own porch and hearing the click of a new lock, I felt something other than shock. I felt the beginning of a counterattack. Daniel's voice softened. Be in my office at 9 a. We need to talk about the hostile interference clause. Hostile interference. Lauren had declared war. She just didn't know the battlefield she had stepped onto. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. 48 hours after being locked out of my own house, I stood outside Charleston County Family Court, holding a leather folder in one hand and my dignity in the other. My incision throbbed beneath my coat, a reminder that I was supposed to be resting, not preparing to defend my sanity in front of a judge. Lauren was already there. She stood near the entrance in a navy dress, hair pulled back neatly, looking composed and sympathetic. Aunt Marjorie sat beside her on the bench, whispering something that made Lauren nod solemnly. When she saw me, she gave me a small, almost pitying smile. You didn't have to come alone, she said softly as I approached. I would have helped. I'm not alone, I replied. Daniel Harper stepped up beside me at that exact moment, briefcase in hand. His calm presence steadied the ground beneath my feet. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and stale. A handful of spectators filled the back rows. Drawn by the word guardianship on the docket, I could feel their eyes on me as I sat at the respondent's table. The clerk called our case. Lauren's attorney rose first. He framed the petition as a temporary protective measure. He spoke about postpartum stress, emotional instability, and the complex responsibility of managing a significant family trust. He emphasized that I served as trustee over assets tied to our parents' estate, that decisions affecting inheritance and property required clarity and stability. Lauren sat beside him with her hands folded, looking concerned. Then her attorney presented what he called supporting documentation. Partial medical notes. A reference to fatigue during pregnancy. A comment I had made about being overwhelmed balancing investigative deadlines with prenatal appointments. They read those lines as if they were proof of psychological collapse. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Daniel objected to the selective use of medical information, but the judge allowed it into preliminary consideration pending verification. Then came the phrase that chilled me. Given the sensitive nature of both the child's welfare and the estate, Lauren's attorney said, "We request temporary financial guardianship to preserve assets until an independent evaluation can be completed." Temporary financial guardianship, which meant Lauren controlling the trust, controlling the estate, controlling decisions tied to our inheritance. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, looking at me. "Do you dispute the need for evaluation?" "I dispute the implication of incapacity," I replied steadily. He nodded once. Then he said the words that tightened the air in my lungs. "I will not dismiss the petition at this stage." A low murmur rippled through the room. My pulse hammered in my ears. The judge continued. "An independent psychiatric evaluation will be scheduled within 10 days. In the meantime, the court orders a temporary review of financial oversight related to the Reynolds family trust." Temporary review. It sounded harmless. It was not. I glanced toward the back of the courtroom and saw a woman I recognized from the trust bank's compliance department. She was taking notes. Lauren's gaze met mine. She did not smile this time. She looked victorious. The hearing adjourned. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the noise of other cases echoed off tile floors. I leaned against the wall for a moment, steadying myself as pain from my incision flared. Lauren approached me once Daniel stepped aside to speak with the clerk. "You see," she said quietly, "the judge has concerns. The judge scheduled an evaluation." I replied, "That's not the same thing." She tilted her head. "Judges side with stability," she said. "And right now, Paige, you look exhausted." Of course I looked exhausted. I had given birth 3 days ago. She lowered her voice further. "I've already spoken with Child Protective Services," she added, "just to make sure everything is safe." My stomach dropped. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "For the baby," she replied simply. Daniel returned before I could say more. Lauren stepped back, smoothing her dress as if nothing significant had been said. Outside the courthouse, Daniel remained composed. "This was predictable," he said. "Predictable," I repeated. "She just secured a financial review." "Yes," he said. "But she also committed herself." I frowned. "She filed before you were discharged," he continued. "Before there was any observable postpartum behavior. That timing matters." "To who?" I asked. "To probate law," he replied calmly. "And to the language in your father's trust." My heart skipped. "You said something about a clause," I said. He nodded. "I reviewed the original trust file last night," he said. "Not the summary version your sister likely saw." We walked slowly toward the parking lot. Every step sent a dull ache through my abdomen. But I kept moving. "Your father inserted a provision 2 years before he passed." Daniel continued. "A hostile interference clause." The words felt heavy. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that if any heir initiates legal action intended to remove, discredit, or incapacitate another heir for financial gain," he said, "that heir forfeits their inheritance." The world seemed to pause. "Lauren's petition qualifies," I asked. "It may," Daniel said, "especially given the timing." My breath caught. "She doesn't know?" I asked. "I doubt she read the full document," he replied. The courthouse doors opened behind us. Lauren exited with her attorney, laughing softly at something he said. She looked confident, untouched, as if the hearing had simply been another box checked. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. "If she continues this petition," he said quietly, "she may lose more than the house." A car horn sounded in the distance. Lauren caught my eye across the lot. For a brief moment, I wondered if I should warn her. If I should tell her what she was risking. Then I remembered the new locks. The neighbors watching. The word unstable printed on a legal petition. No. She had chosen this. Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and frowned slightly. The bank has already initiated the review process, he said. But they haven't suspended you. Yet, I murmured. He met my gaze. Timing is everything, he said. And right now, your sister has placed herself directly under that clause. I looked at Lauren again as she climbed into her car. She believed the hearing had strengthened her position. She believed I was cornered. She had no idea that with every filing, every public accusation, she was tightening a noose she didn't even see. And for the first time since she changed the locks, I felt something steadier than anger. I felt leverage. Daniel Harper's office overlooked the Charleston harbor, the morning light spilling across polished wood and shelves lined with estate binders that smelled faintly of leather and dust. My son slept in his carrier beside my chair, oblivious to the legal weight about to shift his future. Daniel placed a thick binder on the desk between us. Not a photocopy, not a summary, the original trust file. This, he said quietly, is the version your sister never requested. My incision throbbed as I adjusted in the chair. But I leaned forward anyway. He flipped through the tabs with practiced precision until he reached a section I had never seen before. Hostile interference provision. He read aloud. The words looked ordinary on the page. The meaning was not. He began reading in measured tones. In the event that any named heir initiates legal action with the intent to remove, discredit, or otherwise incapacitate another heir for purposes of financial control or estate manipulation, said heir shall forfeit all rights to inheritance under this trust. I stared at the page. Remove. Discredit. Incapacitate. I repeated. Daniel nodded. A guardianship petition alleging mental instability tied to financial oversight qualifies under this language. A strange stillness settled in my chest. She filed while I was still in surgery. I said, yes. Daniel replied, the timestamp strengthens your position. My father had inserted this clause 2 years before he passed. I remembered that year clearly. There had been tension, arguments behind closed doors. Lauren borrowing money quietly, promising repayment that never came. She's only seen the summary trust. Daniel continued. This section wasn't included in the executive digest. I swallowed. If the clause activates, I asked, what happens? She forfeits her entire inheritance share, he said evenly. Not just her claim to the house. Everything. Everything. The rental properties, the investment dividends, her voting authority on the trust board. Daniel turned another page and removed a sealed envelope clipped inside the binder. This is referenced under the same clause, he said. The envelope was labeled in my father's handwriting. To be opened if provision triggered. Daniel broke the seal carefully. He began reading. If you are hearing this letter, my father had written, it means one of my daughters has chosen control over family. I have supported Lauren financially more times than I can count. I have forgiven debt I never disclosed to Paige. If she again attempts to use legal mechanisms to gain advantage over her sister, I want her share redirected to something that builds rather than divides. My throat tightened. Her inheritance shall fund a scholarship in her mother's name. Daniel continued reading. For women rebuilding their lives. My mother had believed fiercely in second chances. She had volunteered at community colleges, mentored single mothers trying to complete degrees. Lauren's share would not disappear. It would transform. Daniel folded the letter gently. She doesn't know this exists, he said. I leaned back slowly, absorbing the weight of it. For a moment, I felt something close to grief. My father had anticipated this possibility. He had written a contingency plan for his own daughters. What triggers it officially? I asked. If she continues the petition through formal review, Daniel replied, and especially if evidence demonstrates financial motive. Her live stream? I said, exactly. He slid a document toward me. We will not warn her, he said calmly. We allow her to continue. the more public and aggressive her actions. The clearer the interference. A flicker of hesitation passed through me. She'll lose everything, I said quietly. Daniel met my eyes. She chose to weaponize guardianship, he replied. The clause is not revenge. It is protection. I looked down at my sleeping son. This was not about punishment. It was about boundaries. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then back at me. The Trust Compliance Department has already flagged the petition under review, he said. If the board votes to enforce the clause, the forfeiture becomes automatic. My phone vibrated almost simultaneously. Notification after notification. I pulled it from my bag and felt my stomach twist. Lauren had gone live again. The thumbnail showed her sitting in my living room. Sunlight behind her like a halo. Caption: protecting my nephew from instability. Daniel watched my expression shift. She's escalating publicly, I said. He nodded slowly. Public malice strengthens enforcement, he replied. I tapped the video. Lauren's voice filled the small office. I love my sister, she was saying tearfully. But sometimes love means stepping in when someone can't make safe decisions. Comments scrolled rapidly beneath her image. Prayers. Concern. Sympathy. My chest tightened. She's shaping public opinion before the evaluation, I said. And in doing so, Daniel replied, she is demonstrating intent. Intent. I turned the phone face down on the desk. What if she withdraws the petition now? I asked. She may attempt to claim misunderstanding, he said. But timing and documentation matter. He paused. There is another factor, he added. What? I asked. She contacted the bank before filing, he said. We have a compliance log. A cold realization slid into place. She had coordinated. This is premeditated, I whispered. Daniel closed the binder carefully. Yes, he said. Outside the window, sailboats drifted across the harbor in quiet contrast to the storm building within my family. She believes she is acting from strength. Daniel continued. But she has stepped into a provision designed for precisely this behavior. I picked up my son and held him close. Breathing in the soft scent of his skin, Lauren thought she had cornered me. She thought the court hearing was the battlefield. She did not yet understand that the real ground had been laid years ago. And with every post, every accusation, every legal motion she filed, she was moving closer to forfeiting the very inheritance she wanted to control. When I left Daniel's office that morning, the pain in my abdomen still lingered. But it no longer felt like weakness. It felt like recovery. And Lauren, unaware of the clause she had triggered, was walking straight toward consequences she had never bothered to read. The Harborview HOA clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner when I walked in. Saturday afternoon sunlight filtered through narrow blinds, striping the folding chairs arranged in stiff, uneven rows. I recognized nearly every face in the room. Women from the church luncheon committee, retired couples who had watched me grow up, a few younger families who had moved in recently and still treated neighborhood politics like entertainment. Lauren stood at the front beside the HOA president, a stack of neatly clipped packets in her hands. She looked composed, prepared. When she saw me enter carrying my son against my chest, she didn't flinch. She smiled. A few whispers rippled through the room as I took a seat near the aisle. My incision ached beneath my dress, but I kept my shoulders straight. Lauren began speaking before the meeting was even formally called to order. I appreciate everyone coming, she said warmly. This is about protecting family, protecting our community, and protecting a child. She handed packets down the rows. I caught a glimpse of headings as one passed in front of me. Guardianship summary. Trust oversight concerns. Temporary financial safeguards. She spoke gently, carefully. My sister has been under extraordinary stress, she continued. Pregnancy complications, professional pressure, managing a large inheritance. I'm not accusing her of wrongdoing. I'm asking for caution. Caution. The word sounded reasonable, calculated. She referenced the pending court evaluation. She mentioned the family trust. She suggested that until clarity was established, certain property decisions should require joint oversight. A subtle removal of authority. A neighbor raised her hand. "Is the baby safe?" she asked. Lauren nodded solemnly. "That's exactly why I filed. To ensure everything remained stable." I felt my pulse steady rather than spike. She believed this was her arena. Halfway through her presentation, the clubhouse door opened quietly. Daniel Harper stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not interrupt. He waited until Lauren finished her sentence about temporary removal of unilateral trustee voting rights. Then he cleared his throat. "May I speak?" he asked. The HOA president hesitated, then nodded. Daniel moved to the front of the room with measured calm. "I represent Paige Reynolds," he said evenly, "and I would like to clarify one legal matter before this discussion proceeds." Lauren's fingers tightened around her packet. Daniel turned toward her directly. "Did you inform this body?" he asked. "That the Reynolds Family Trust includes a hostile interference clause." Silence settled. Lauren blinked once. "I'm not aware of any such language," she replied. A few heads turned. Daniel opened a slim folder. "The clause states," he continued, "that any heir who initiates legal action intended to remove, discredit, or incapacitate another heir for financial gain forfeits their inheritance." The room grew still. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize. He simply let the words exist. Lauren's expression shifted slightly. "This petition is about safety," she said quickly. Daniel nodded. "Timing suggests otherwise," he replied. He lifted a document. The guardianship petition was filed while Mrs. Reynolds was still hospitalized. Additionally, the petitioner contacted the trust's financial institution prior to filing. Murmurs rippled through the chairs. Lauren's composure cracked at the edges. "That's standard due diligence," she said sharply. Daniel looked toward the HOA president. "The trust board has already initiated review under the clause," he continued, "if enforced. Ms. Lauren Reynolds forfeits all inheritance rights." The word forfeits hung in the air like a bell. Lauren's face drained of color. "That's not," she began. Daniel removed another sheet. "There is also a conditional letter from the late Mr. Reynolds," he said. He unfolded the page and read calmly. "If this clause is activated, the forfeited share shall fund a scholarship in my wife's name for women rebuilding their lives. I refuse to allow estate assets to be used as leverage between my daughters." Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One of the church elders lowered his gaze. Lauren's breathing grew uneven. "This is being misrepresented," she insisted. Daniel turned to the room. "Any further public or legal attempt to remove Missin Paige Reynolds from her trustee role strengthens enforcement," he said. The HOA president cleared his throat. "Our association does not have authority over private trust disputes," he said cautiously. "We cannot intervene in property ownership absent court order." A neighbor near the back whispered, "So she could lose everything." Lauren's phone buzzed loudly in her hand. She glanced down. Her eyes widened. Daniel saw it too. "The Trust Compliance Department has formally frozen her discretionary distribution pending clause review," he said quietly. Lauren looked at me then. Not with pity. Not with confidence. With something close to disbelief. "You wouldn't do this," she said under her breath as the meeting dissolved into whispers. "I didn't," I replied calmly. "You did." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're barely holding yourself together." I shifted my son slightly against my shoulder. "I don't need to shout," I said softly. "The documents speak. Around us." Neighbors began leaving in subdued silence. No one approached Lauren with comfort. No one approached me with accusation. The narrative had shifted. Not because I attacked, but because she overreached. As I walked toward the exit, Lauren followed. "This isn't over," she whispered sharply. "You can't hide behind paperwork forever." I paused at the doorway. "For someone who claimed this was about safety," I said quietly, "you're very concerned about money." Her jaw tightened. "That evening, As I placed my son down for a nap in the quiet of my temporary condo, my phone buzzed again. An official notification appeared. Charleston County Family Services. Home evaluation scheduled within 72 hours. I stared at the screen. Lauren had not retreated. She had shifted the battlefield. From inheritance to custody. And for the first time, the threat felt deeper than property lines or trust clauses. She was coming for my child. And that was a line no clause had to teach me how to defend. The knock came at 9 in the morning. It was firm but not aggressive. 3 measured taps that echoed through the quiet condo. My son was asleep against my shoulder, warm and heavy, and for a moment I let myself imagine it was a delivery driver or a neighbor. But I already knew. I opened the door to a woman in her 40s with a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. "Ms. Paige Reynolds?" she asked politely. "Yes. I'm Angela Morris with Charleston County Child Protective Services. I'm here regarding a welfare review." Her tone was professional, not accusatory. Still, the words landed like stones. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. She entered slowly, eyes scanning the room with practiced neutrality. The condo was spotless. Bottles sterilized. Diapers stacked neatly. Pediatric appointment cards pinned to the fridge. She sat at the small dining table and opened her folder. "I want to be clear," she began. "This is a standard follow-up when concerns are filed." "What kind of concerns?" I asked evenly. She glanced at her notes. "Reports of postpartum emotional instability and potential financial stress impacting child safety." Lauren's language? Almost verbatim. "I see," I said. Angela looked up at me then, and her expression softened just slightly. "I'm not here to assume anything," she said. "I'm here to observe and document." She asked about my sleep schedule, my support network, my feeding routine, whether I had experienced intrusive thoughts. Each question was clinical, but beneath them I could feel the implication. I answered calmly. Yes, I was tired. I had delivered by emergency surgery less than a week ago. No, I had not experienced thoughts of harm. Yes, I had consistent pediatric care scheduled. No, I was not financially distressed. At that, she paused. The complaint suggests there are disputes regarding a family trust and inheritance, she said carefully. There is a legal disagreement, I replied. It does not impact my child's safety. She watched me for a long moment. Has anyone attempted to pressure you financially? She asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said after a beat. Your sister? She asked. Yes. She wrote something down. Angela then asked to see the nursery space. I walked her to the small bedroom I had set up temporarily. The crib was assembled properly, the monitor positioned correctly. The room smelled faintly of baby powder and fresh laundry. She inspected without dramatics. Back in the living area, she closed her folder. Ms. Reynolds, she said evenly. I see no indicators of neglect or instability. Relief washed through me. But I kept my posture steady. However, she continued, the filing pattern suggests retaliation may be involved. Retaliation. The word lingered. If you believe the complaint was malicious, she added, your attorney may submit documentation. I will, I said. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. Lauren had tried to paint me as unfit, and now the state had quietly concluded otherwise. My phone rang before I could even sit down. Daniel, it happened, didn't it? He asked. Yes, I replied. Home visit complete. And he pressed. She found nothing, I said. A faint exhale came through the line. Good, he said. Because Lauren escalated. How? I asked. She filed a supplemental statement in family court, he replied, requesting expedited psychiatric evaluation and temporary custody review pending assessment. The room tilted slightly. Custody, I repeated. She's arguing that financial stress combined with postpartum vulnerability may create risk. My grip tightened on the phone. She's manufacturing instability, I said. Yes, he replied calmly. And in doing so, she is solidifying intent. Intent. She's doubling down, I whispered. And that helps us, he said. There was a brief pause. The trust board convened this morning. Daniel continued. They voted to begin formal enforcement review of the hostile interference clause. My heart thudded once. Already? I asked. Yes, he said. The CPS complaint timestamp was attached to her petition history. She had not only attacked me, she had documented her own pattern. When is the custody hearing? I asked. Expedited review in 5 days, he replied. 5 days. My son stirred in his bassinet, stretching tiny fingers toward the ceiling. I won't let her take him, I said quietly. She won't, Daniel replied. The CPS preliminary report is in your favor, and the judge will see the escalation. What if she keeps filing? I asked. Then she accelerates forfeiture, he said evenly. There was silence between us for a moment. Paige, he added, your father designed that clause for a reason. I thought of the letter, of the scholarship provision. Lauren believed custody pressure would make me retreat. She believed motherhood had made me fragile. Instead, it had made me focused. That afternoon, an official email arrived from the Trust's compliance department. Subject: Preliminary Enforcement Notice. It stated that pending review, Lauren Reynolds's discretionary inheritance distributions were temporarily frozen. Frozen. I imagined her checking her accounts, refreshing, waiting, and seeing nothing move. The clause was no longer theoretical. It was active. That evening, as I rocked my son by the window, the city lights flickering across the harbor, I felt something shift. Lauren had moved from property control to custody warfare. But in doing so, she had crossed from family disagreement into documented interference. The battlefield had narrowed. The next hearing would decide more than optics. It would decide whether her escalation cost her everything. And for the first time since she changed the locks, I no longer felt defensive. I felt prepared. The family courtroom felt smaller than the probate court had. Maybe it was because this time the stakes weren't abstract assets or trustee titles. This time, my son's future sat in a bassinet beside my chair. Lauren entered with her attorney 10 minutes early. She wore cream instead of navy today. Softer colors. Less authority. More sympathy. She didn't look at me. The judge took the bench promptly. This is an expedited review regarding minor child welfare and guardianship petition, he stated. Lauren's attorney stood first. He argued that escalating financial stress and patterned instability required precautionary measures. He referenced Lauren's concerned family intervention. He spoke about the Reynolds estate and its complexity, suggesting that emotional strain could compromise parental judgment. He was careful not to accuse me directly. He didn't have to. The implication was enough. Daniel rose next. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. Your Honor, he began. We submit the preliminary CPS report conducted 48 hours ago. He handed copies to the clerk. The judge reviewed the document briefly. CPS found no evidence of neglect, instability, or risk, Daniel continued. In fact, the report notes potential retaliatory motivation behind the complaint. A quiet ripple passed through the courtroom. Lauren's jaw tightened. Daniel then presented a timeline. The guardianship petition was filed while Mrs. Reynolds was still hospitalized following emergency surgery. Within hours of that filing, petitioner contacted the trust's financial institution to question trustee competency. The judge looked toward Lauren. Is that accurate? He asked. Lauren's attorney stepped in quickly. Due diligence, Your Honor. Daniel nodded calmly. Due diligence that triggered internal compliance review, he said, and coincidentally aligned with financial distribution cycles under the Reynolds inheritance. The word inheritance hung between us. This was no longer framed as maternal concern. It was motive. Lauren finally spoke. I'm trying to protect my nephew, she said, her voice tight but controlled. My sister is overwhelmed. She's always been obsessive about control. The trust, the trust, Daniel interrupted gently, contains a hostile interference clause. He handed another document to the clerk. This clause states that any heir initiating legal action to remove or incapacitate another heir for financial control forfeits inheritance rights. Lauren's attorney objected, but the judge raised a hand. Is this clause valid? The judge asked. It is active under review by the trust board, Daniel replied, and petitioner's actions fall squarely within its scope. The judge leaned back slightly. So the financial consequences of this petition extend beyond custody? He asked. Yes, Your Honor. Lauren's composure fractured. This isn't about money, she insisted. It's about stability. Daniel turned a single page. Petitioner filed her supplemental custody request within hours of receiving notice that her discretionary trust distributions were frozen pending review. The courtroom went still. The judge's gaze sharpened. Miss Reynolds, he said to Lauren, did you file the supplemental custody motion after receiving notice from the trust? Lauren hesitated. Her attorney whispered urgently beside her. Yes, she said finally. The judge exhaled slowly. The CPS caseworker was called to the stand. Angela Morris testified calmly. The home environment was safe. The infant appeared healthy and bonded. The mother presented as alert and appropriate. No indicators of risk were observed. Did you observe financial instability impacting care? Daniel asked. No, Angela replied. Did the complaint appear spontaneous or patterned? Angela paused. Based on documentation timing, she said. It appears coordinated with ongoing legal dispute. The word coordinated settled like a final nail. Lauren's attorney attempted to reframe, but the damage was done. The judge removed his glasses and looked directly at Lauren. Guardianship is a serious legal instrument, he said evenly. It is not a tool for leverage in estate disputes. Silence pressed against the walls. I find no basis for temporary custody review, he continued. The petition is dismissed. My breath left me slowly. Lauren's shoulders stiffened. And, the judge added, this court cautions against further filings absent substantial new evidence. Repeated unsupported petitions may be considered retaliatory. Retaliatory? Documented. Lauren sat frozen. The gavel fell softly. It was not dramatic, but it was final. Outside the courtroom, Lauren approached me before her attorney could stop her. You're destroying this family, she said quietly. I adjusted my son's blanket. No, I replied. I'm protecting it. She shook her head. You think the clause will hold? She whispered. It already has, I said. Daniel stepped beside me. The trust board has finalized enforcement, he said calmly. Forfeiture notice was issued this morning. Lauren's face went pale. You're bluffing, she said. Daniel handed her an envelope. Official letterhead. Trust Compliance Division. She opened it with trembling hands. Her eyes moved across the page once. Then again. No, she whispered. Her inheritance share, frozen pending final board certification, was now formally revoked under the hostile interference provision, redirected to the scholarship fund outlined in our father's letter. She did not scream. She did not argue. She simply stood there, absorbing the cost of escalation. This didn't have to happen, she said faintly. You filed while I was in surgery, I replied. She looked at my son. For a flicker of a second, I saw something almost human there. Then it hardened. She turned and walked away down the corridor, heels echoing against tile. No dramatic collapse. No public scene. Just the quiet unraveling of entitlement. As I buckled my son into his car seat outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The house was still mine. The trust was intact. Custody secure. Lauren had attempted to weaponize guardianship. She had attempted to manipulate inheritance. And in doing so, she had activated the very clause designed to prevent it. I closed the car door gently. For the first time since standing on my porch with a useless key in my hand, I felt safe. Not because she had lost, But because the system had recognized what she had tried to do, and there was nothing left for her to file, the house felt different when I unlocked it this time. The new brass key turned smoothly, clean and unchallenged, and the door opened without resistance. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floors, catching dust motes in quiet suspension. For a moment, I just stood there holding my son, listening to the stillness. No footsteps on the porch, no neighbors whispering, no folder in Lauren's hands. Just silence. The locksmith had replaced every lock 2 days earlier. The security system had been upgraded. The bank had reinstated my full trustee authority. The trust board's final enforcement notice had been signed and archived. Lauren's inheritance share had officially been redirected. Not seized. Not destroyed. Redirected into the scholarship fund my father had written about in that sealed letter. I walked into the living room and sat in my father's leather chair. My son shifted against my chest and made a small, sleepy sound. "This is yours," I whispered to him softly. "Not the money. The stability." The house had never been about square footage. It had been about voice. Later that week, Daniel and I attended the trust board meeting at the downtown office. The room overlooked the harbor, the same stretch of water I had stared at the night everything unraveled. The board chair read the resolution aloud. Under the hostile interference provision, the forfeited inheritance allocation of Lauren Reynolds shall fund the Margaret Reynolds Educational Grant. My mother's name. Several board members nodded solemnly. They had known my parents for decades. They understood what the clause had been meant to prevent. I signed the final documents with steady hands. The fund would provide tuition support for women returning to school after financial hardship, divorce, or single parenthood. Lauren had tried to use inheritance as leverage. Instead, it would build futures. 2 days after the meeting, the local Charleston Gazette called requesting a short feature on the scholarship initiative. "Your mother's legacy is inspiring," the reporter said warmly. I agreed to a modest interview. No mention of the court case. No mention of guardianship. Just the purpose of the fund. That was the only narrative I wanted attached to my name. The letter arrived that evening. Plain white envelope. No return address. Familiar handwriting. Lauren's. I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of my son's breathing from the baby monitor. I could imagine the contents. An apology. Or blame. Or justification. Perhaps she would say I overreacted. That she had only wanted to help. That I had humiliated her publicly. For months, I had reacted to her moves. Her filings. Her live streams. Her accusations. This envelope was different. It required nothing from me. I picked it up and weighed it in my hand. Forgiveness does not require proximity. Closure does not require response. I walked to the fireplace and struck a match. The paper curled at the edges as the flame caught. The ink darkened, then blackened, then disappeared into ash. Not out of anger, out of finality. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen holding my son while sunlight streamed across the counters. The air felt clean. The house felt steady. The trust secure. The legacy intact. Lauren had not been escorted away in handcuffs. There had been no dramatic public collapse. No shouting on courthouse steps. Just consequences. Quiet. Legal. Documented consequences. Family is not immunity. Blood is not entitlement. And calling a woman unstable does not give you ownership over her life. Especially not when she has read the documents more carefully than you have. I walked to the front porch later that afternoon. "Mrs. Henderson waved from across the street. "Everything settled," she called. "Yes," I replied simply. She smiled and nodded. Satisfied. Inside, I placed my son in his crib and watched him stretch his tiny arms toward the ceiling. No one would ever use guardianship as a weapon against him. No one would ever redefine his mother's strength as instability. I had learned something in these past weeks. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it signs quietly. Sometimes it activates a clause written years ago. Sometimes it is simply the decision to hold your ground while someone else overplays theirs. If you were standing on that porch with a newborn in your arms and a sister changing the locks behind you, would you have warned her about the clause? Would you have opened that letter? Or would you have done exactly what I did? I'd truly like to know. If this story felt familiar in any way, if you've ever had to draw a hard boundary with someone who shared your last name, tell me in the comments. And if you believe protecting your dignity is never selfish, stay here with us. There are more stories about women who refuse to be erased. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's simply knowing you're still standing. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.